The twin suns of Realis 9 were sinking behind the red dust hills, spreading long shadows across the open marketplace. The air smelled of iron and smoke, and traders shouted over each other, trying to sell the last of their goods before nightfall. Among the noise and flashing neon lights, an alien woman stood quietly near a food stall, clutching a small metal box to her chest. Her name was Kalera. Her skin shimmered faintly under the pale sun. Once a soft gold when her life was full, now faded to a dull gray. She had been a wife once, and a mother once. But war had taken everything from her. Her husband had gone to fight beside humans during the Great Rift War. He never came back. Now she stood alone, hungry and tired, wearing a robe with torn edges, hoping to buy one simple meal. The merchant, a thick-scaled trader named Brock, counted the glowing credit chips she placed on the counter. He frowned, his nostrils flaring. "This is not enough," he hissed, sliding the chips back. "Come back when you can pay." Kalera looked down, her throat tight. "I only need the smallest pack," she said softly. "Please." "My ration card expired." The merchant shook his head. "Rules are rules," he said coldly. "No credits. No food." A few bystanders turned their heads, whispering to each other. "She's one of the widows," someone muttered. "From the human war," another sneered. She should have known better than to trust them. Kalera's cheeks burned with shame, and she slowly pushed the food pack back across the counter. Her trembling fingers left small prints of dust on the metal surface. She turned to leave, her heart heavy, her stomach empty. Then a voice broke the noise. "I'll cover it." The words were clear and steady, spoken in Galactic common, but with a human accent. The crowd fell silent. Kalera froze, and slowly turned. He stood a few steps behind her, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark travel coat marked with the insignia of the Terran Union. A human. His face was partly hidden under his helmet visor, the glow of his wrist communicator casting blue light over his features. He reached into his belt pouch and placed a few glowing chips on the counter. Far more than the price of one meal. The merchant blinked, quickly taking them without a word. Kalera stared at the stranger, confused. Her kind had never been treated kindly by humans since the war. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. "Nothing," he said simply. "Just food for someone who needs it." She did not understand. Humans were soldiers, destroyers, mercenaries, not saviors, at least. That's what everyone told her, but this man did not look cruel. He looked tired, his armor scratched, his eyes carrying the same sadness she felt in her own heart. As she stood there holding the food pack, her hands trembling, the human turned to leave. Kalera called out. "Wait." He stopped, half turning, the lights from a nearby hover truck shining across his armor. "Why?" she asked. "Why would a human help me?" He looked at her for a moment, as if remembering something long buried. Then he said softly, "Because it's what he would have wanted," before she could ask what he meant. He was gone, disappearing into the dim alleys of the market, leaving only the echo of his boots in the dust. Kalera stood there for a long time, the food still in her hands. The crowd slowly began to move again, their whispers fading into the background noise. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from confusion. Who was that man? And what did he mean by he? That night, Kalera returned to her small home at the edge of the settlement. The wind howled softly through the metal walls, bringing the chill of the desert. She sat beside a small lantern, the dim light flickering on the cracked photo panel that showed her husband, smiling. Wearing the same Terran uniform as the stranger, her fingers brushed across his image. And for the first time in many moons, she whispered his name aloud. Tarin. Was it possible, she thought, that the human had known him? Or was it only a trick of fate, Another cruel reminder of what she had lost. She did not know, but one thing felt different. For the first time in a long time, the silence around her did not feel so heavy. There was a warmth in her chest she could not explain. A small flicker of something she thought had died long ago. Hope. Outside, the storm winds rose again, carrying the scent of iron and dust, but far away, in the direction the human had walked. She could see a faint blue glow in the night, a campfire perhaps, or maybe the light of a Terran beacon. Kalira watched it through the window, her hand pressed against the glass. She wanted to hate him, but she couldn't, because for reasons she didn't yet understand. She felt that this meeting was not an accident. It was the beginning of something bigger than both of them. Something that would change not only her life, but perhaps the future of two worlds. The next morning came slowly, with the pale suns climbing above the rusty hills of Realus 9. Kalira sat near the window of her small home, watching the thin light fall through the cracks of the old walls. The memory of the human still played in her mind. His calm voice, his steady eyes, and those strange words. Because it's what he would have wanted, she repeated them under her breath, trying to understand. Who is he talking about? And why did it sound like he knew her husband's name without saying it? She tried to brush the thoughts away, but they followed her all day. By noon, she walked back to the marketplace, hoping to sell some old metal scraps to earn more credits. The air buzzed with noise again, traders arguing, hoverbikes roaring past, and children running between the stalls. But Kalira's eyes searched every corner, looking for the tall figure in the dark Terran coat. He was nowhere to be seen. Then, near the far edge of the market, she saw a group of miners gathered around a small repair booth. At the center stood the same human, working on a broken exosuit with skilled hands. His armor plates were stacked beside him, marked with battle scars and dust. The name on his shoulder tag read Reynolds. Kalira watched from a distance, unsure whether to approach. Humans and aliens rarely mixed in peace since the war. Many still blamed each other for what was lost, yet something about him felt different. He moved with quiet patience, never raising his voice, never showing pride. When a young miner dropped his tools, the human smiled gently and helped him pick them up. It was not the way soldiers behaved. It was the way people behaved who still believed in kindness. Finally, Kalira gathered courage and stepped closer. Reynolds looked up, his helmet resting beside him, revealing a tired but kind face. He nodded slightly, as if he had been expecting her. "Kalira," he said softly, using her name like it was something sacred. She froze. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and wonder. He wiped the dust from his hands, looked at her for a long moment, and said, "I knew your husband." Her heart skipped a beat. The sound of the market faded behind her, replaced by the soft hum of wind and distant engines. You fought in the Great Rift War?" She whispered. "Yes," Reynolds said. "I was there on the frontier when the sky burned red. Your husband saved my life more than once." Kalira's hands trembled. "Taran," she said quietly, her eyes filling with tears. "You knew Taran," Reynolds nodded, his expression darkening with memory. "He was brave. He talked about you every night by the campfire, said that when the war ended, he wanted to bring peace to both our worlds." Kalira felt her knees grow weak. She leaned against the booth for support. No one had spoken her husband's name in years. Reynolds reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal tag. Scratched and burned, but still readable. Her husband's name was engraved on it. "He gave this to me before the final battle," Reynolds said, his voice low. "He asked me to find you one day and make sure you were safe." Tears rolled down Kalira's face. Silent and heavy, she took the tag with both hands. pressing it against her chest. "I thought I had nothing left," she whispered. "I thought the universe forgot me." Reynolds shook his head slowly. "No one is forgotten," he said. "Not while someone still remembers, for a moment." Neither spoke. The wind carried the smell of dust and machinery. And far above, 2 transport ships crossed the clouds like silver birds. Kalira finally looked up, her eyes sharp again. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after so many years?" Reynolds looked away, staring at the horizon. "Because peace is breaking again," he said. "And I made a promise to him, if the storms ever returned, I would find you before they reached this planet." Her breath caught in her throat. "What storms?" Reynolds hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Raiders, mercenaries, scavengers, they are coming," he said, "looking for weak colonies to plunder. And your settlement is next." Kalira's heart pounded. The last war had already stolen her family, her home, her hope. Now it seemed it would steal her people again. "What can I do?" she asked. Reynolds placed a small communication beacon in her hand, its light blinking faintly blue. "When it starts," he said, "use this, and I will come." Before she could say more, he put on his helmet, turned, and disappeared into the crowd once again. Kalira stood there, holding the beacon close. She looked at it, then at the metal tag, both glowing faintly in the sun. Her heart was torn between fear and trust. She didn't know if she could believe in humans again. But she remembered her husband's words, his dream of unity, and the way Reynolds looked at her, not as an alien, not as a stranger, but as someone who mattered. As the day faded into evening, Kalira walked home with slow steps. Behind her, thunder rumbled over the hills. A storm was truly coming, and she knew, deep inside, that the human would return, not for duty, but for something greater, something that connected them both, honor, and the promise of a dying friend. The night came heavy and silent. Dark clouds covered the twin suns, and the air smelled of storm and metal. Kalira could feel something wrong in the wind, a quiet unease that wrapped around her small house like a shadow. She sat by the table, staring at the tiny blue beacon the human had given her. Its soft glow pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and steady. She didn't know if she should trust it, or if she should run outside. The desert winds howled through the metal streets of the colony. Most homes were shut tight, lights dimmed to save power far in the distance. Thunder rolled, but it wasn't thunder. It was engines, heavy and low, coming closer. Kalira rose quickly, her heart pounding through the window. She saw faint red lights moving across the horizon. Ships, not transporters, not patrols, but raider vessels. Armed and fast, the alarm towers stayed silent. No one expected an attack here. This colony was poor, forgotten. Not worth a fight, but to raiders. Desperation was enough reason. Kalira ran outside, shouting to her neighbors, "Hide! Get the children inside!" Panic spread like fire, people running, doors slamming, dust rising under their feet. The first explosion hit near the outer market. Shaking the ground, sparks and smoke filled the air. Kalira fell to her knees, ears ringing, vision blurred. Then she remembered the beacon. Her trembling hands reached into her robe and pressed it. The blue light flashed bright, then steady, sending a signal into the dark sky. For a moment, nothing happened then. High above the clouds, something answered. A second blue light blinked back, far away. But moving fast, the raiders entered the colony, their hovercrafts roaring through the streets. They wore metal masks and spiked armor, carrying plasma rifles and chains. They shouted in a language Kalira didn't understand, kicking open doors and dragging out people. She tried to hide behind a broken transport crate. Clutching the beacon tight, one of the raiders spotted her, his eyes glowing red through his mask. He raised his weapon, stepping closer. Kalira froze. Then the sky split open. A blast of blue energy struck the ground between them, sending the raider flying back from the smoke and dust. A figure dropped down, heavy armor, glowing visor, the Terran insignia shining through the chaos. Captain Reynolds. He landed hard, his exosuit roaring as its systems came online, blue lights flashing across his arms and chest. Without hesitation, he opened fire. Bolts of plasma streaked through the air, hitting the raiders with perfect aim. Kalira watched in awe as he moved like a storm, fast, controlled, unstoppable. The other raiders turned to attack, but Reynolds was faster. He used his wrist shield to block their shots, then slammed one to the ground with a powered strike. Another tried to flank him, but Kalira grabbed a fallen pipe and hit the raider's arm, giving Reynolds an opening. He nodded once at her, a silent thank you, before turning back to the fight. The air burned with light and sound. The colony walls shook, fires spreading between the stalls and houses. Reynolds pushed forward, clearing one street after another. Kalira followed behind, helping wounded villagers to safety, shouting orders to those who could still move. It felt strange. A human leading aliens, and aliens trusting him. But in that moment, it didn't matter who was what. They were all just people trying to survive. A sudden explosion hit near the energy tower. Throwing Reynolds off his feet, Kalira ran to him, dragging him behind a fallen wall. "Are you hurt?" she asked, breathless. He coughed, checking his armor. "Not yet," he said with a weak grin. "But this suit won't last much longer." Above them, the raider ship circled low, preparing to fire again. Kalira looked around desperately, her eyes landing on a power core near the tower's base. "If we can overload that core," she said, "it will release an energy wave strong enough to knock them out." Reynolds looked at her with surprise, then smiled under his helmet. "Your husband said you were smart," he said. "Let's do it, together." They ran through the debris, dodging blaster fire. Kalira used her alien bioenergy to unlock the power core access panel, her hands glowing faintly with golden light. Reynolds rerouted the circuits, setting the overload sequence. 30 seconds, he said. "We need to move." They sprinted toward the nearest shelter. The raiders saw them and opened fire again, shots hitting the ground around their feet. At the last moment, Reynolds threw his shield behind them, and the explosion followed, a blinding flash that tore through the sky. The raider ship tilted violently, engines failing, and crashed beyond the ridge in a cloud of smoke. The rest of the raiders fled into the desert, their leader shouting orders to retreat. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of fire and the hum of the power core cooling down. Kalira stood beside Reynolds, both of them breathing hard, covered in dust and ash. The colony was damaged, but alive. People came out slowly, eyes wide, whispering in disbelief. A human had fought for them, had saved them. For Kalira, it felt like something inside her had changed forever. She turned to Reynolds, her voice trembling. "You came back." He looked at her through his cracked visor and said quietly, "I made a promise." She smiled faintly, tears mixing with dust. For the first time, she believed those words fully. The promise was not just to her husband. It was to her, to the people, to something greater, to humanity's heart. The battle was over. The raiders were gone, their ships burning far beyond the dunes. The colony lay quiet under the pale light of dawn, the air filled with smoke and the smell of dust and metal. Broken walls and shattered stalls stood as silent reminders of what they had survived. But they had survived because of one human. Kalira walked slowly through the ruins, helping the wounded and comforting the crying children. Her robe was torn, her hands covered with ash, yet her eyes were calm. When she reached the old water well near the center of the colony, she saw him there, sitting against a wall, Captain Reynolds. His armor was cracked and smoking, sparks flickering from the shoulder joint. He had removed his helmet, his face pale and tired, blood running down from a cut near his temple. Kalira rushed to him, kneeling beside him. "You need a medic," she said softly. Her voice breaking, he smiled faintly. "I've had worse," he whispered. "But thank you." She placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the heat of the suit beneath. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said. "You could have died here." Reynolds looked at her, eyes dim but kind. "I promised him I would protect you," he said quietly. "I couldn't walk away from that." Kalira felt her throat tighten. "Taran," she whispered. "You really knew him?" Reynolds nodded, his gaze turning distant. "We fought together in the rift trenches. Side by side for months, he was brave, too brave sometimes." He paused, breathing slowly. "During the last battle, when our line fell, he saved my life. Dragged me out of the fire while the enemy ships rained plasma down. He was hurt badly. We both were. But he never stopped fighting until the end." Kalira listened in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had dreamed of hearing her husband's story, but not like this. Not from the man who carried the final memory of him. Reynolds reached into his armor pocket and pulled out something small. A data chip. Worn and blackened, he held it out with a shaking hand. "He told me to give this to you if I ever found you," he said. "He wanted you to know something." Kalira took the chip with trembling fingers, her heart racing. She activated it, and a faint blue projection flickered to life above her palm. The image was weak, broken, but the voice was clear. "Kalira," it said. Her breath caught. It was him, her husband Taran. He looked tired, his armor scorched, but his eyes were full of warmth. "If you see this," the message continued, "then I did not come home. But don't cry, my love. I kept my promise. I fought for peace. For you, for our people. And I want you to know something. The human beside me, his name is Reynolds. He is my brother now. Not by blood, but by battle. If one of us falls, the other will watch over what remains." Kalira pressed her hand over her mouth. Sobbing quietly, Taran's voice grew weaker. "Don't hate them, Kalira. Don't hate humans. They are not perfect, but some of them. They carry hearts stronger than steel. And if the day ever comes when one of them helps you, trust him. Because he's helping me too." The recording ended. Fading into a soft hum, Kalira sat frozen, her hands shaking. Reynolds closed his eyes, leaning back against the wall. "I promised him," he said quietly. "I told him I would keep you safe, no matter what it cost." His breathing grew slower, weaker. Kalira grabbed his hand. "No," she said, "you can't leave now. You kept your promise, but your story isn't done." Reynolds gave a faint smile. "You sound just like him," he whispered. "He said that too." She looked around, calling for help, and a few colonists came running. They lifted Reynolds carefully, carrying him to the shelter where the medics worked. Kalira followed, holding both the data chip and the metal tag close to her heart. She felt something burning inside her. Grief, yes, but also pride. Her husband had trusted a human with her life, and that human had proven worthy of that trust. Later, as the suns rose higher, Kalira stood outside the medic tent, watching the bright sky. The war had taken so much, yet in its shadow, it had left behind something unexpected. A bond that crossed blood, race, and world. A promise kept. Even after death, inside the tent, Reynolds rested quietly, still breathing, his hand holding the same broken tag that once belonged to Taran. Calera smiled through her tears, whispering to herself. "Humans," she said softly. "They never stop surprising us." The days after the battle passed slowly. Smoke faded from the skies, and the colony began to breathe again. The people worked together, rebuilding the homes that had fallen. For the first time, humans and aliens stood side by side. Not as enemies, but as survivors. Calera walked through the rebuilt streets. Her robe now clean, her eyes calm. Children laughed again, chasing each other through the dust. The air smelled of life instead of war, and at the center of it all, the small Terran flag that Captain Reynolds had left behind fluttered in the warm wind. He had survived. The medics said it was a miracle. His armor was broken, his body weak. But his spirit refused to give up. Calera visited him every day, bringing water, food, and company. At first, they spoke little, only quiet nods and shared silences. But with time, they began to talk about the past, about her husband, about what peace truly meant. One evening, as the sun set behind the red dunes, Reynolds sat outside the medic tent. Watching the light fade, Calera stood beside him, holding the metal tag and the old data chip. "I listened to his message again today," she said softly. "He believed humans and our kind could build something better." Reynolds smiled faintly, his voice low and steady. "He believed because he saw it in us," he said. "And now, I see it in you." They sat together in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. In that quiet moment, there was no difference between them, only two hearts that had seen too much loss and still chose hope. Weeks turned into months. The colony became stronger, the people more united. Calera took charge of a new rebuilding council, helping humans and aliens share resources, trade, and skills. She became a leader not by title, but by compassion. When travelers arrived from other worlds, they often asked about the strange friendship that began the peace of Relus 9. And every time, someone would point toward the old market square, where a small statue now stood. It showed two figures, one alien, one human, standing side by side, their hands resting on the same broken sword. Below it, a message was carved in both languages. Promises kept, worlds healed. Calera often visited the statue when the night was quiet. Sometimes she would bring children there and tell them the story. She told them about the war, about her husband, and about the human who came back when no one else would. The children would listen wide-eyed, and one of them always asked the same question. Who was he? Calera would smile softly, her voice gentle. He was a human soldier. But more than that, he was a man of honor. He kept a promise made on a dying battlefield. He showed us that humanity is not only in blood, but in the heart. One evening, years later, when the sun set and the sky turned violet, Reynolds stood again at the edge of the colony. His armor repaired, his strength returned. He looked toward the rebuilt houses and the glowing lights that now lined the streets. Calera stood beside him, a quiet pride in her eyes. "This place was dying," he said softly. "Now look at it." She smiled. "You did this." He shook his head. "No, we did this." They watched the stars rise together. The sky filled with ships, trade vessels, peacekeepers, explorers, a new age beginning, built on trust and courage. The wind whispered across the sands, carrying the faint sound of laughter and life. Calera looked up and whispered to herself. "Taran, you are right," she said. "Humans. They really do change galaxies." The camera pans up to the twin suns fading behind the horizon. The soft light glows over the colony, over the statue, and over the flag that still waves gently in the wind. A single line appears across the stars. In the darkest times, humanity shines the brightest.